The Cordoban Sage, an introduction to Seneca. Picture, if you will, the golden light of late afternoon falling across the cobblestones of ancient Cordoba. The year is somewhere near the birth of Christ, and in this bustling Roman city in southern Spain, a child is born who will one day teach the world how to bear its deepest sorrows with grace. His name is Lucius Annaeus Seneca, and tonight, dear listener, his wisdom becomes yours. You've carried so much today, haven't you? The weight of others' expectations, the endless performance of being strong, being capable, being everything to everyone. Tonight, let that weight settle into these ancient stones beneath our feet. Let Cordoba hold it for a while as we walk together through the life of a man who understood, truly understood, what it means to suffer, to lose, and yet to find a way forward. Seneca was born into privilege, yes, but not into ease. His father, Marcus Annaeus, Seneca the Elder, was a renowned teacher of rhetoric, one of those brilliant, demanding men who shaped minds and expected excellence. Picture young Lucius in the family's villa, listening to the cadence of practiced speeches, watching his father command rooms full of ambitious Romans. The art of words, the power of persuasion, the weight of public life. These were the rhythms of his childhood. But there was something fragile about this boy from the beginning. His health was delicate, his constitution weak. While other children ran through Cordoba's sun-drenched streets, young Seneca often found himself confined, observing life from the margins. Perhaps you know this feeling. The sense of watching others live while you tend to invisible burdens, manage quiet struggles that no one else can see. His mother, Helvia, was different from the typical Roman matron. She was educated, thoughtful, a woman who valued wisdom over wealth. In her, Seneca found his first teacher in resilience. She would later face exile, loss, the particular grief that comes to women who love deeply in a world that takes without asking. But in these early years, she was his anchor, showing him that strength doesn't always announce itself, that sometimes the most profound courage is simply continuing, day after day, with grace. When Seneca was still young, his family moved to Rome. Imagine the culture shock. Leaving the warm, provincial rhythms of Cordoba for the marble magnificence and brutal ambition of the empire's heart. Rome was a city that devoured the weak and elevated the ruthless. For a sensitive boy with a questioning mind, it must have felt overwhelming. The noise, the crowds, the constant performance of power and status. Does this resonate with you, dear one? That feeling of being thrust into spaces that demand more than you feel capable of giving? Rome taught Seneca early that survival required a different kind of strength than he'd known in Cordoba. Not the strength of the body. His would always betray him. But the strength of the inner self. He studied rhetoric, as was expected of a young man of his station. But something else called to him: philosophy. In the schools of Rome, he encountered Stoicism, that ancient Greek wisdom tradition that promised not happiness, but something more valuable, equanimity in the face of life's inevitable storms. The Stoics taught that we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond. They spoke of accepting loss, of finding freedom through understanding our limitations, of discovering peace, not by avoiding suffering, but by changing our relationship to it. For young Seneca, fragile in body but fierce in mind, these ideas felt like coming home. His teachers were men who had themselves known exile, loss, the particular pain of watching empires rise and fall. They taught him that grief is not something to overcome, but something to move through, like walking through a dark forest, trusting that somewhere ahead lies dawn. They showed him that the human heart is capable of holding both sorrow and joy, both loss and hope, without breaking. But philosophy in Seneca's Rome was not merely academic. It was survival training for a world that could strip away everything you loved without warning. Emperors rose and fell like seasons. Fortunes vanished overnight. Families were torn apart by political winds that shifted faster than Mediterranean storms. In such a world, the Stoic promise that your inner life could remain free no matter what external forces raged around you was not abstract comfort, but practical necessity. Seneca's health continued to trouble him throughout his youth. There were periods of illness so severe that he contemplated ending his life rather than continuing to suffer. But something held him back. Perhaps his mother's quiet strength, perhaps his growing understanding that suffering itself could be a teacher, perhaps simply the stubborn human refusal to surrender to despair. In these dark periods, he began to develop what would become his greatest gift, the ability to speak to human pain with neither false comfort nor bitter cynicism, but with honest hope. He learned that the most profound wisdom often comes not from those who have avoided suffering, but from those who have walked through it and emerged with their capacity for love intact. His early writings show us a young man grappling with questions that feel startlingly modern. How do we maintain our integrity in corrupt systems? How do we love people we know we will lose? How do we find meaning in a world that often seems random and cruel? How do we care for others without losing ourselves in the process? These questions shaped him as he moved into public life, first as a lawyer, then as a senator, eventually as advisor to emperors. But always, underneath the public roles, he remained that sensitive boy from Cordoba, the one who had learned early that life's deepest truths are found not in avoiding difficulty, but in meeting it with wisdom and grace. Rome would test him in ways he could never have imagined. He would know exile, political intrigue, the constant dance between survival and principle that defined life in the imperial court. He would watch friends die, witness the rise of tyrants, experience firsthand how quickly fortune's wheel can turn. And through it all, he would continue writing letters, essays, plays, creating a body of work that speaks across centuries to anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by life's demands. Tonight, as you settle into rest, know that you are not alone in your weariness. Across 2,000 years, a man from Cordoba reaches out to you with understanding born of his own struggles. He knows what it feels like to carry more than seems possible. He knows the weight of others' expectations, the exhaustion of constant performance, the grief that comes with loving in a world that takes without asking. But he also knows something else. Something that sustained him through exile and loss, through political upheaval and personal tragedy. He knows that within you lies a strength that cannot be touched by external circumstances, a capacity for peace that no one else can grant or take away. And in the hours ahead, as his story unfolds, you will discover this strength for yourself. The boy from Cordoba grew up to become one of history's greatest teachers of resilience. His lessons, tested by fire and refined by suffering, wait for you now in the gentle darkness of this Roman night. The Roman stage, politics and philosophy, intertwined. The marble corridors of the imperial palace gleamed with a cold magnificence that morning when young Seneca first walked among the most powerful people in the world. The boy, who had once struggled to breathe in the dusty hills of Cordoba, now moved through halls where every whisper could topple kingdoms, where every smile concealed a dagger, where every friendship was a calculated risk. You know this feeling, don't you? That moment when you step into a room where the rules are different, where the very air seems charged with ambition and danger, where you must wear a mask so carefully crafted that sometimes you forget what lies beneath it. Seneca understood this game from his first day in the capital. Rome in the first century was not just a city, but a vast theater where everyone played a role. Senators donned togas of dignity while plotting in shadows. Wealthy merchants spoke of virtue while counting coins stained with others' misfortune. And at the center of it all sat the emperor, that most dangerous of actors, whose performance could mean life or death for millions. But Seneca brought something different to this stage. While others performed for power or gold or the fleeting applause of the crowd, he carried within him those quiet lessons learned in illness and exile. The Stoic teachings that had sustained him through his darkest hours now became his compass through the labyrinth of Roman politics. Picture him in those early years, a young man of extraordinary talent, his mind sharp as any blade forged in the empire's finest workshops. He could craft speeches that moved senators to tears, write letters that changed the course of legislation, compose philosophical treatises that would outlive the very stones of Rome itself. Yet always, he remembered the fragile boy who had gasped for breath and wondered if he would see another dawn. This is the paradox that would define his entire life. The more successful he became in the external world, the more deeply he understood that true peace could never be found there. While others chased after the glittering prizes of political life, Seneca was learning a different kind of wisdom. He was discovering that the only victory that mattered was the one won within the quiet chambers of his own heart. And oh, what chambers of power he would enter! What roles he would be asked to play! The summons came on a winter morning when Rome lay shrouded in mist. The boy Nero, some heir to the greatest empire the world had ever known, needed a tutor. Not just any teacher, but someone who could shape the mind that would one day command legions, decide the fate of nations, hold the power of life and death over millions of souls. They chose Seneca. Can you imagine the weight of such a calling? To know that every word you speak, every lesson you impart, every value you instill might echo through history, it was like being asked to sculpt not marble, but the very future itself. Seneca accepted, of course. How could he refuse? But as he walked through those palace gates for the first time as imperial tutor, he carried with him not dreams of glory, but the quiet wisdom of his philosophy. He would teach this young prince about power, yes. But more importantly, he would try to teach him about the responsibility that comes with it. The irony was exquisite, in the way that life's ironies always are. Here was a man who had learned that external things could never bring lasting happiness, now tasked with educating someone who would possess more external things than any human being in history. Here was a philosopher who preached simplicity and virtue, now dwelling in rooms decorated with treasures plundered from across the known world. You understand this tension, don't you? The way life asks us to navigate between our deepest values and the practical demands of the world around us. The way we must sometimes work within imperfect systems while trying to remain true to perfect ideals. The exhausting dance of compromise and conviction that marks every thoughtful life. Seneca danced this dance with extraordinary grace. By day, he moved through the corridors of power, advising on matters of state, crafting the policies that would govern an empire. He helped guide Rome through years of relative peace and prosperity. Trade flourished, the arts bloomed, the machinery of government ran with unprecedented smoothness. But by night, he returned to his true work. In the quiet hours when the palace slept, when the last courtier had whispered the last secret and the final petition had been heard, Seneca would light his lamp and write. He would pour onto papyrus the wisdom that his days in the political arena had only confirmed. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, he would write, thinking perhaps of his own journey from the sickly boy of Cordoba to the counselor of emperors. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. These were not abstract philosophical musings, but hard-won insights forged in the fires of real experience. When he wrote about dealing with difficult people, he was thinking of the senators who smiled while plotting betrayal. When he explored the nature of true wealth, he was surrounded by more luxury than most people could imagine, yet he knew it brought no lasting satisfaction. When he counseled about finding peace in chaos, he was living in the very heart of an empire where chaos was always one assassination, one rebellion, one natural disaster away. And then there was Nero himself, the student who would become both Seneca's greatest challenge and his most profound disappointment. In the beginning, there was hope. The young prince showed flashes of intelligence, moments of genuine curiosity about philosophy and governance. Seneca poured his heart into those lessons, believing perhaps that he could shape a philosopher king, a ruler who would embody the stoic virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. But power, as Seneca was learning, has its own gravity. It bends everything around it, including the souls of those who wield it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he watched his student change. The thoughtful questions gave way to imperial demands. The interest in virtue faded before the intoxication of absolute authority. The boy who had once listened eagerly to lessons about compassion grew into a man who would order executions as casually as he might order dinner. It was heartbreaking in the way that only the deepest disappointments can be. To watch someone you have invested in, someone you have hoped for, someone you have tried to guide toward goodness, to watch them choose a different path entirely. Yet even this became a teacher. Even this failure became a source of wisdom. Seneca learned that we cannot control others, no matter how much we love them or how hard we try. We cannot force virtue upon someone who does not choose it. We cannot make another person's decisions for them, no matter how clearly we see where those decisions lead. All we can do is tend our own garden. All we can do is make our own choices with integrity and wisdom. All we can do is offer our best and then release our attachment to the outcome. This lesson, learned in the most public and painful way possible, would become one of his greatest gifts to future generations, including you, lying here in the darkness, perhaps thinking of your own disappointments, your own failed attempts to change others, your own exhaustion from trying to carry burdens that were never yours to bear. Seneca's story whispers to you across the centuries, you are not responsible for everyone else's choices. You are not required to fix what others have broken. Your job is simply to live with wisdom and kindness, to do your best with whatever circumstances you find yourself in, and to trust that this is enough. Exile and reflection, the seeds of Stoic wisdom. And so it was that in the year 41 CE, when Seneca was 45 years old, everything he had built came crashing down around him. The new emperor Claudius, influenced by his wife Messalina, accused Seneca of adultery with Julia Livilla, the sister of Caligula. Whether the charges were true hardly mattered. What mattered was that Seneca found himself stripped of his position, his wealth confiscated, his life in Rome over, exile to Corsica, a rocky, wind-swept island in the Mediterranean where political prisoners were sent to disappear. For most Romans, this would have been a death sentence of the spirit, if not the body. But for Seneca, perhaps this was exactly what his soul had been waiting for. Picture him on that first morning, standing on the shores of Corsica, watching the ship that had brought him grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the horizon. The man who had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics was suddenly alone. Completely, utterly alone. And in that aloneness, something remarkable began to happen. You know this feeling, don't you? That moment when the noise finally stops, when the demands and expectations and endless needs of others fade away and you're left with just yourself. It's terrifying at first. Without all those external voices telling you who to be and what to do, who are you really? Seneca discovered that exile, for all its hardships, was also a kind of freedom. For the first time in decades, he could think his own thoughts without political calculation. He could write without wondering how his words might be used against him. He could simply be The island was harsh. The accommodations were basic. The food was simple. The company was limited to fellow exiles and local fishermen, but Seneca began to see these limitations not as punishments, but as teachers. He started writing letters, not the careful diplomatic correspondence of his political days, but honest, searching explorations of what it means to be human. Letters to his mother Helvia, trying to comfort her grief over his exile. Letters to friends, sharing the insights that solitude was teaching him. Letters to himself, really, working through the profound questions that only emerge when everything familiar has been stripped away. "What is the good life?" he wrote. "It is not found in the approval of crowds or the accumulation of honors. It is not built on the foundation of others' opinions or the shifting sands of political fortune. The good life is found in wisdom, in virtue, in the cultivation of an inner strength that no emperor can confiscate." In the mornings, he would walk the rugged coastline, watching the waves crash against the rocks with relentless persistence. The sea didn't care about Roman politics or imperial favor. It simply was. Eternal, indifferent, magnificent in its constancy. There was something deeply comforting in this, something that spoke to the part of him that had always felt separate from the machinations of power. He began to understand that his years in Rome, for all their apparent success, had been a kind of prison. He had been so focused on managing others, on trying to influence outcomes, on carrying the weight of responsibilities that were never truly his to bear. The exile that seemed like punishment was actually liberation. You understand this, don't you? How sometimes what looks like loss is actually the universe giving you permission to stop carrying what was never yours to carry in the first place. In the afternoons, he would write. Page after page of philosophical reflection, but not the dry academic philosophy of the schools. This was philosophy born from lived experience, from real suffering, from the hard-won wisdom of a man who had tasted both triumph and defeat and found them equally instructive. "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," he wrote, thinking of all the years he had spent worrying about outcomes he couldn't control, anticipating disasters that never came, carrying anxieties that belonged to other people. Here in exile, stripped of everything he thought he needed, he was discovering that he had everything he actually needed within himself. The evenings were perhaps the most profound. As darkness fell over the Mediterranean, Seneca would sit with a simple oil lamp and read the works of earlier Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Chrysippus, but now their words landed differently. They weren't abstract concepts anymore, but practical tools, tested in the crucible of real loss and genuine solitude. He began to see that his years of trying to reform Nero, of believing he could shape the character of an empire through proximity to power, had been a kind of hubris. Not the dramatic, mythological hubris of the Greek tragedies, but the quiet, persistent hubris of believing that he was responsible for outcomes beyond his control. "The only thing we truly control," he wrote, "is our response to what happens to us. Everything else, the actions of others, the turns of fortune, the rise and fall of empires, these belong to fate, not to us." This wasn't resignation. It was the most profound kind of empowerment. When you stop trying to control what you cannot control, you discover how much power you actually have over what you can control: your thoughts, your choices, your character, your response to whatever life brings. The local fishermen, initially suspicious of this Roman exile, gradually came to respect his quiet dignity, his willingness to live simply, his lack of bitterness about his circumstances. They would sometimes find him sitting on the rocks at dawn, not brooding or plotting his return to power, but simply present, watching the light change on the water, breathing the salt air, existing fully in each moment as it came. This presence, this radical acceptance of what is rather than what should be, became the foundation of everything he would later write. The letters that would comfort grieving mothers, the essays that would guide anxious minds, the treatises that would offer hope to the suffering. All of it grew from these quiet mornings on a rocky island where a former advisor to emperors learned to find peace in powerlessness. He wrote to his friend Lucilius, "I have lost a consulship, lost wealth, lost position, and in losing these things, I have found myself. I have found the unshakable core that no external circumstance can touch." And you, listening to this in your own kind of exile, your own separation from the endless demands and expectations, you understand what he discovered, don't you? That sometimes the thing that looks like failure is actually the beginning of wisdom. Sometimes what feels like abandonment is actually an invitation to come home to yourself. The years passed slowly on Corsica. 8 years of exile, 8 years of reflection, 8 years of learning to find richness in simplicity and strength in surrender. Seneca aged on that island, his dark hair growing gray, his face weathered by sea winds, but something in his eyes grew clearer, calmer, more deeply at peace. He was writing now not for political advantage or intellectual display, but for the simple human need to share what he was learning. That suffering is universal, that loss is inevitable, but that within each of us lies an indestructible capacity for wisdom, for courage, for love that asks nothing in return. The man who would eventually return to Rome would be fundamentally different from the one who had left, not broken by exile, but refined by it. Not bitter about loss, but grateful for what it had taught him. Not eager to reclaim power, but content to offer service from a place of genuine strength rather than desperate need. And in the gathering darkness of your own day, as you feel the weight of everything you've been carrying begin to lift, perhaps you can sense what Seneca discovered in his island solitude, that you are enough, exactly as you are, exactly where you are, right now. Consolation and compassion, Seneca's words of comfort. And from this place of hard-won wisdom, this understanding born of his own suffering and solitude, Seneca began to write letters that would echo across centuries. Letters to friends who were drowning in grief, to students wrestling with loss, to anyone who had ever felt the crushing weight of a world that seemed too heavy to bear. One such letter arrived at the door of a woman named Marcia, a mother whose son had died 3 years before, yet whose tears still fell as fresh as morning rain. She was trapped, you see, in that terrible space where grief becomes a prison, where the love we cannot let go of becomes the very thing that holds us captive. Seneca had never met this woman's son. He had not known the boy's laugh or witnessed his first steps or held him through childhood fevers. But he understood something deeper. He understood the geography of a mother's heart, the way love carves channels so deep that when loss floods in, it threatens to drown everything else. "Dear Marcia," he began, and you can almost see him by lamplight, choosing each word like a physician, selecting the gentlest instruments for the most delicate surgery. "I would not dare to limit your grief or set boundaries around your sorrow, but I cannot watch you destroy yourself in honor of someone who would never have wanted your destruction." This was not the harsh comfort of those who tell us to get over it or move on. This was not the empty consolation of those who have never stood at the edge of such loss themselves. This was something else entirely. The voice of someone who had learned that true compassion means sitting with pain, not rushing to eliminate it. Seneca understood that Marcia's grief was not a problem to be solved, but a love that needed a new place to live. Her son was gone. This brutal fact could not be changed, could not be negotiated with, could not be undone by any amount of tears or rage or bargaining with the gods. But the love itself, that was eternal, indestructible, beyond the reach of death. Your son, he wrote, lived fully in the time he was given. He experienced joy, wonder, the warmth of your embrace, the safety of being completely loved. Death took his future, yes, but it cannot touch what he already experienced. It cannot steal the reality of his life or the truth of your love. Can you feel the gentle wisdom in this? The way he doesn't minimize her loss but reframes it, not as a theft of everything, but as the completion of something precious and whole? Your son's life, he suggests, was not a story cut short, but a story told completely, even if briefly. And then, with the skill of someone who has wrestled his own demons into submission, Seneca begins to address the deeper poison that grief can become. The way we can turn our love into a weapon against ourselves, the way sorrow can become an identity we're afraid to release because we fear that letting go of pain means letting go of love itself. You fear, he writes, that moving beyond this grief would be a betrayal of your son's memory. You believe that your tears are proof of your love, that your suffering honors his life. But tell me, would your son want his mother to waste away? Would he choose your destruction as his memorial? There's such tenderness in this question, such understanding of how we can become attached to our own suffering, how we can mistake pain for loyalty, anguish for love. Seneca sees through to the heart of it, that Marcia is not just grieving her son, she is grieving the future she had imagined, the dreams she had built, the version of herself that existed only in relationship to his life. You mourn not just what was, he observes, but what you believed would be. You grieve not only his death, but the death of your expectations, your plans, your vision of how life was supposed to unfold. And this is where your suffering multiplies unnecessarily. How many times have you felt this yourself? Not just the loss of what was, but the shattering of what you thought was promised? The job that didn't come through, the relationship that ended, the dream that died, the person you thought you could count on who simply disappeared. We grieve not just reality, but our assumptions about reality. We mourn not just what happened, but what we were so sure was going to happen. Seneca, writing by lamplight to this broken-hearted mother, offers something revolutionary: the possibility that we can love completely without needing to control the outcome, that we can invest fully in life while holding lightly to our expectations, that we can honor what was without demanding that it continue forever. Nature, he reminds Marcia, gives us nothing permanently. We are all borrowers of life, of love, of time. Your son was a gift on loan, not a possession guaranteed. The tragedy is not that the loan ended. The tragedy would be if you had never received it at all. Can you feel how this shifts everything, from victim to recipient, from robbed to blessed, from cheated to grateful? Not because the pain isn't real, but because the pain is not the whole story. And then Seneca does something beautiful. He helps Marcia imagine her son not as gone, but as transformed, not disappeared, but freed from the limitations of flesh and time and worry. He has returned, Seneca suggests, to the source from which he came. He is not lost, he is found, not diminished, but expanded beyond all boundaries. Whether or not you believe in any particular vision of afterlife, there's something profound in this invitation to see death not as ending, but as transformation. To consider that what we call loss might be, from another perspective, a kind of liberation. Your son, Seneca writes, no longer knows hunger or cold, fear or disappointment, illness or aging. He is beyond the reach of all the things that cause suffering in this world. If you love him, can you not find some peace in his peace? This is not denial of death's reality, but a refusal to let death have the final word about the meaning of life. This is not false comfort, but an invitation to expand our understanding of what love can be when it's no longer bound by physical presence. And finally, with the gentleness of someone who has learned that the deepest truths must be offered, never forced, Seneca suggests that Marcia's healing will come not from forgetting her son, but from remembering him differently, not as a source of pain, but as a teacher of gratitude, not as evidence of life's cruelty, but as proof of life's profound capacity for beauty, however brief. Let your love for him become a celebration of the fact that such love is possible, he writes. Let your grief transform into gratitude that you were chosen to be his mother, even for such a short time. Let your tears become prayers of thanksgiving for the gift of having known such pure love. And as you lie here in the gentle darkness, perhaps you can feel what Marcia might have felt reading these words. Not the erasure of sorrow, but the possibility that sorrow itself could be transformed into something sacred. That love, even when it hurts, even when it's complicated, even when it's tangled up with loss, is still the most precious thing we have. That you, in all your tiredness and tenderness, in all your caring and carrying, are participating in something beautiful and eternal. The endless human capacity to love beyond reason, to hope beyond evidence, to keep opening your heart even when you know it might break again. The nature of loss, finding strength in acceptance. Seneca understood something that modern life seems determined to make us forget. That loss is not a failure of our planning, or a punishment for our mistakes, or even something we should be able to prevent if we just try hard enough. Loss is simply the price of admission to a life fully lived. In his letters to Lucilius, written in those final years when he could see his own mortality approaching like distant storm clouds, Seneca wrote about this with the clarity that only comes from having survived many seasons of grief. Every new beginning, he observed, comes from some other beginning's end. You know this truth in your bones, don't you? Every time you've had to let go of who you used to be to become who you needed to be. Every time you've watched someone you love change in ways you couldn't control. Every time you've had to release your grip on how you thought things would unfold. Seneca called this the discipline of desire. Not the suppression of wanting, but the wisdom to want what life actually offers, rather than exhausting ourselves, demanding what it cannot give. He wrote once to a friend who had lost everything in a fire: his home, his possessions, his sense of security. And Seneca's response was not to minimize the loss or offer empty consolations about everything happening for a reason. Instead, he wrote, "You have lost nothing that was truly yours. What fire can touch the love you have given? What flames can consume the kindness you have shown? What destruction can reach the person you have become through all your choices to care, to try, to hope?" This wasn't philosophical theory for Seneca. It was hard-won wisdom. He had lost his father, his infant son, his political career, his health, his safety, his certainty about the future. He had watched the student he'd tried so hard to guide become a monster. He had seen his own ideals tested against the brutal realities of power and found them imperfect, insufficient, sometimes completely inadequate. And yet he kept writing, kept teaching, kept believing that there was something in the human spirit that loss could touch but never truly destroy. "We suffer more in imagination than in reality," he wrote, and this might be his most practical gift to you tonight. This recognition that so much of our pain comes not from what is actually happening, but from our resistance to what is happening. Our stories about what it means, our fears about what comes next, our endless mental rehearsals of worst-case scenarios. What if? What if tonight you could set down some of that imaginary suffering? What if you could let yourself feel what you're actually feeling without the added weight of what you think you should be feeling? Seneca taught that there are 3 kinds of loss, and understanding the difference could change how you carry your grief. First, There are the losses that are complete illusions, the things we never actually had but convinced ourselves we possessed. Control over other people's choices, guarantees about the future, the right to a life without disappointment. These losses hurt, but they're really invitations to freedom. Freedom from trying to hold on to what was never ours to begin with. Then there are the losses that are real but temporary. Setbacks, failures, rejections, the end of chapters that felt like they should be the whole story. These losses teach us about resilience, about our capacity to begin again, about the surprising ways that closed doors sometimes lead to better paths. And finally, there are the losses that are real and permanent, the deaths, the irreversible changes, the dreams that time has proven impossible. These losses, Seneca believed, are where we learn the deepest truths about love, that its value was never in its permanence, but in its reality, that having loved fully, even briefly, is infinitely better than having protected ourselves from ever loving at all. It is not that we have a short time to live, he wrote, but that we waste a lot of it. And what he meant was, we waste so much time grieving the wrong things, mourning the imaginary losses while missing the actual gifts, protecting ourselves from future pain while forgetting to receive present joy. You've been so careful, haven't you? So responsible about everyone else's feelings, so worried about disappointing people, about not being enough, about taking up too much space or not contributing enough. But what if your worth was never something you had to earn or prove or maintain? What if it was just a fact, like gravity or sunlight, or the way water finds its level? Seneca's final lesson about loss came in how he faced his own death. When Nero finally turned against his old teacher and ordered him to take his own life, the historians tell us that Seneca received this news calmly, that he spent his final hours not raging against the injustice or bargaining for more time, but expressing gratitude for the life he had lived and the people he had loved. He gathered his friends around him. He spoke words of comfort to his wife. He dictated final thoughts to his students. And when the poison worked too slowly because his old body was too weak to absorb it quickly, he asked to be carried to a warm bath where he could slip away peacefully, still teaching by example that there are ways to meet even the ultimate loss with grace. This wasn't resignation. It was acceptance. The difference between giving up and letting go, between defeat and surrender. Tonight, as your breathing deepens and your muscles release their hold on the day's tensions, can you practice this kind of surrender, not to the things that truly matter, but to the exhausting effort of trying to control what cannot be controlled? Can you let yourself grieve what needs to be grieved and release what needs to be released, and trust that what remains, what is truly yours, is stronger than any loss? Your capacity for love, your willingness to care, your ability to begin again tomorrow. These are not possessions that can be taken from you. They are qualities of who you are, and they grow stronger, not weaker, each time you choose to use them despite the risks. Seneca would want you to know that your tiredness is not a weakness, but evidence of how much you have given, that your sensitivity is not a flaw, but a superpower in a world that has forgotten how to feel, that your losses, all of them, have been teaching you something precious about what it means to be fully, courageously human, and that tomorrow you get to choose again how to love this difficult, beautiful world. An enduring legacy, Seneca's wisdom for today and tomorrow. Tomorrow you get to choose again how to love this difficult, beautiful world. Just as Seneca chose, again and again, to find meaning in the midst of uncertainty, to discover wisdom in the heart of suffering, to transform every ending into a new beginning. For you see, dear one, Seneca's words have traveled across 2,000 years to reach you tonight. Not because they were carved in marble or written in gold, but because they were forged in the same fire that you know so well, the fire of human experience, of love and loss, of hope deferred and dreams reimagined. In your own life, you have been practicing stoicism without knowing it. Every time you chose kindness when you felt empty, every time you showed up for someone else when you barely had energy for yourself, every time you found a way to keep going when everything inside you wanted to stop. Seneca would recognize this strength, would see in your daily acts of courage the same philosophy he spent a lifetime learning to articulate. The mother who stays patient when her children test every boundary. She is practicing Seneca's teaching about controlling only what is within our power. The friend who listens without judgment to the same story told again and again. She is embodying his wisdom about compassion as a choice we make, not a feeling we wait to receive. The woman who gets up each morning and tends to her responsibilities despite her own heartache. She is living proof that resilience is not about feeling strong, but about acting with love even when strength feels impossible to find. This is what Seneca understood in those final years, that philosophy is not an intellectual exercise, but a way of being in the world. Not a set of rules to memorize, but a practice of returning, again and again, to what matters most. He wrote his letters not to display his wisdom, but to remind himself daily of the truths he was still learning to live by. And what truths they were. That every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, and therefore deserves your gentleness. That the things you cannot control will always outnumber the things you can. And peace lies in learning to love this ratio rather than fight it. That your worth is not determined by your productivity, your perfection, or your ability to make everyone around you happy. In our world of endless notifications and constant comparison, Seneca's voice offers something revolutionary: permission to be ordinary, to be human, to be enough exactly as you are. He reminds us that wisdom is not about having all the answers, but about asking better questions. Not, why is this happening to me? But how can I grow through this? Not, when will this pain end? But, what is this teaching me about my own capacity for love? You have been asking these better questions, haven't you? Even when you didn't realize it. Every time you chose to see someone's behavior as a reflection of their pain, rather than a judgment of your worth. Every time you decided to be grateful for what remains, rather than bitter about what was lost. Every time you found a way to laugh in the midst of tears, to hope in the midst of uncertainty, to love in the midst of fear. These are not small things. These are the very practices that Seneca spent his life cultivating, the habits of heart and mind that transform suffering from something that diminishes us into something that deepens us, that makes us more capable of wisdom, more deserving of our own compassion. And compassion. This was perhaps Seneca's greatest gift to the world, the understanding that we are all walking each other home, all struggling with the same fundamental questions about how to love well in a world that offers no guarantees. He knew that the mother grieving her son, and the emperor facing his mortality, and the exile longing for home were all asking the same question: how do I find meaning in the midst of impermanence? His answer was always the same. Through connection, through service, through the radical act of choosing love even when love brings vulnerability, even when love guarantees loss. He taught that we find our way not by avoiding the darkness, but by learning to carry light within it. Not by protecting ourselves from pain, but by discovering that our capacity to heal and be healed is infinite. This capacity lives in you, has always lived in you, in the way you notice when someone needs encouragement, in the way you remember the small details that matter to the people you love, in the way you keep showing up for life even when life feels overwhelming. Seneca would see in these ordinary miracles the proof of philosophy made flesh, wisdom transformed from concept into practice. And perhaps this is why his words feel so familiar, not because you have read them before, but because you have lived them. In every moment when you chose grace over grievance, acceptance over resistance, love over fear, you have been writing your own letters to the future, creating your own legacy of kindness, one small choice at a time. The woman who will wake up tomorrow in your body. She will inherit all of this wisdom, all of this strength, all of this accumulated knowledge about how to be human with dignity and grace. She will carry forward everything you have learned about resilience, everything you have discovered about your own capacity to love and be loved, everything you have earned through the simple act of not giving up. Seneca believed that we are all connected across time, that the wisdom of the past reaches forward to comfort the present, just as the courage of the present reaches forward to inspire the future. Tonight, as you rest, you are part of this great conversation, this endless dialogue between souls who have known suffering and chosen love anyway, who have faced uncertainty and chosen hope anyway, who have experienced loss and chosen gratitude anyway. Your tiredness tonight is not a failure. It is evidence of engagement, proof that you have been fully present to your life, fully committed to the people and purposes that matter to you. Seneca would honor this tiredness, would see in it the same weariness he felt after a day of trying to live according to his highest values, of attempting to be worthy of the love he had been given. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of something larger than yourself, part of a tradition of wisdom that stretches back through Seneca to the ancient Stoics and forward through you to generations yet to come. A tradition that says every ordinary life lived with intention and compassion is a masterpiece. Every small act of love is a victory. Every day that we choose to keep our hearts open, despite the risk, is a day that adds to the sum total of light in the world. And as sleep takes you gently into its arms, as your breathing deepens and your muscles release the day's tension, as your mind lets go of its careful vigilance and allows itself to drift, know that you are held by the same peace that Seneca found in his final moments, the peace that comes from knowing you have loved well, that you have tried your best, that you have added something beautiful to the world simply by being yourself, fully and courageously yourself, in all your imperfect, struggling, magnificent humanity.